We understand why that is, and we're glad you're here. Appreciate your presence. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you every night about some of these things, and I hope it's helpful. I hope maybe we say some things that you think, well, I hadn't thought about it that way before. I hadn't thought about it quite like that before. Or maybe just say some things you already know, and that's good too, just to be reminded. Repetition is absolutely the key to learning, and sometimes we just need to repeat some things just for our own benefit. Tomorrow night, we're going to shift gears tomorrow night and talk about parents and children. And tomorrow night, I want to talk about 10 things I want my kids to know. 10 things I want my kids to know. Now, before you get really shook up about that, because you start doing the math, you go, well, if he spends 10 minutes on each one of those, some of those are going to be bullet points, so you're going to write really fast tomorrow night, okay? But 10 things I want my kids to know. And then Friday night, we'll end the whole thing and talk about the gospel begins at home, okay? The gospel begins at home. Tonight, we're going to do a little different, because I was thinking about doing this, and I thought, yeah, I think I want to do this. I want to talk tonight about how to treat people. How to treat people. And look at how Jesus treated people. You say, well, I thought this was all about marriage and all of that. I think that's what marriage is about. I think what marriage is about is learning how to treat people. You know? Especially how to treat your spouse. And so maybe we can learn a little bit about how to treat each other by looking at some examples of Jesus and see how Jesus treated people. If I had to pick one thing, people ask me every once in a while, what's your favorite thing to talk about? If I had to pick one thing, this would be it. I love the one-on-one conversations Jesus had with people. That's my favorite thing to talk about. I've got a book out called Simple Scenes in the Life of Jesus. And they're all about these one-on-one conversations Jesus had with people. People like us. And it's interesting to me to watch how he handles these conversations. And it's interesting to see how he comes across as he deals with just a cross-section of people. And I'm amazed so many times how kind he is. And how compassionate he is. And how many times do we hear that word, compassion? And how patient he is, especially with the 12. Don't you know he got frustrated with them sometimes? Whether it was Thomas or whether it was James and John, sons of thunder, wanting to bring down Sodom and Gomorrah on anybody who didn't listen to them. Or Peter, he always was opening his mouth, inserting foot. And so there was times Jesus would get frustrated, but his patience with those men. And I see Jesus listening to people who came to him. He listened. He gave them his attention. You ever talk to somebody and felt like their mind was somewhere else? When Jesus talked to you, he focused on you. You ever talk to somebody and they made you feel like you were the only person in the room? That's Jesus. He showed everybody that they had value. He wanted to make sure they knew that they were valuable to him. He held them accountable. He wasn't afraid to do that. But above all, he showed them the love of God. And should we do any less with the people we encounter? And should we do any less in a marriage relationship with our own spouse? Sometimes we treat people in the world better than we treat our own spouse. And there's something major wrong with that picture. Turn to Luke chapter 7. Luke the 7th chapter, beginning in verse 36. I want to start here tonight. Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 36. Now, one of the Pharisees was requesting Jesus to dine with him. And he entered the Pharisee's house and reclined at table. Now there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. Now I have a marginal notation here that says literally she was an immoral woman. And when she learned that he, Jesus, was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, She brought an alabaster vial of perfume, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and kept wiping them with the hair of her head, and kissing his feet, and anointing them with the perfume. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, mumble, insert mumble, okay? If this man were a prophet, he would know who and what sort of person this woman is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. I have a marginal notation. An immoral woman. All right, we'll come back to that in just a minute. But as you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you can pick any of these scenes of these people who come to Jesus. And it's just filled with story after story of just troubled people, messed up people sometimes, coming to Jesus. The stories are very sad. And sometimes they're very shameful. Sometimes they're very shockable. Stories of rejection, stories of outcast, stories of despair, stories of people who were at the end of their rope. And yet for some reason, they sought him out and they came to him. And you could pick any of them. Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus didn't exactly have an ethical history, did he? He was, after all, a publican, which means he was a Jew working for the hated Romans as a tax collector. And tax collectors were notoriously just bad people. They would collect much more than Rome demanded and pocket the rest for themselves. And so they had a terrible reputation. They would be spat upon by the Jewish populace. And so nobody liked a publican, a tax collector like Zacchaeus. And so here comes Jesus and his disciples through Jericho. And people are beginning to wonder, where is the master going to stay the night? Who's he going to go home with? And I'm sure they surmised he would probably go home with one of the leaders of the Pharisees. But he didn't. He stopped and he looked up in that tree. And this is when I have to go into vacation Bible school mode. He looked up in that tree and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down from there, because I'm going to your house today, you know. And the Pharisees mumbled and grumbled about that. And Jesus went to that man's house and it changed his life forever. The way Jesus treated Zacchaeus shocked a lot of people. But it didn't shock Jesus. The crook on the cross, by his own admission, he said to his crony, we are getting what we deserve. And he looks at Jesus and he says, any chance, any possibility you might remember me? And do you remember what Jesus said to that man? He had already confessed that Jesus hadn't done anything wrong. The thieves had done wrong, but he says, this man has done nothing wrong. And he looks at Jesus and he says, any way you might remember me? And do you remember what Jesus said? Today you will be with me in paradise. That's shocking. But not to Jesus. The woman with the issue of blood. Here's Jesus walking along and there's this great crowd of people, and suddenly Jesus stops and he says, someone touched me. And Peter said, Lord, everybody's touching you. Everybody's wanting a piece of you. And Jesus said, no. Somebody touched me. And it was this woman. And she was down to her last hope. She had spent every dime she had on doctors and had no cure. And she was down to her last hope. And her last hope was the only hope that she needed. And Jesus healed her. I like the case in John chapter 8 of the woman taken in adultery. Remember that scene? That interaction? Where they come to Jesus with this woman and they say, we caught this woman. And they were very adamant about it. We caught this woman in the very act, you know. I've always wondered, where's the man? Did he go out a side window? Did he go out a back door? You know, this is a setup deal. You know that is. And it says that. They came to him And they said to him, Teacher, this is in verse 4, Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say? They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. You ever heard the phrase rock in a hard place? Well, that's where they had Jesus. Because if Jesus had said, well, take her and stone her according to the law of Moses, these Pharisees would have run as quick as their feet could take them to the Roman authorities. And they would say, this Jesus of Nazareth, he's a rogue rabbi. He's teaching our people to disobey Rome, because they were under Roman law. They were a subservient people in the first century. And so that's exactly what they would have done. And they would have said to the Roman authorities, he needs to be arrested, which would have taken care of him, got rid of him. But if Jesus had said, on the other hand, well, we're under Roman law, we can't go by that now, the law of Moses, they would have turned to the people and said, what kind of rabbi is this? He's out here preaching for our people to just disregard the law of Moses. And what kind of rabbi is this? So they had Jesus between a rock and a hard place. So what does he do? Well, the first thing he does in verse 6, Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. When they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, he who is without sin among you, let him be the first to cast a stone. And then in verse 8, again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And we know the rest of that story. What did he write? Well, we don't know. The Holy Spirit didn't tell us, didn't reveal it. Now, here's what's funny about that. You can have any commentary, and they're going to tell you exactly what he wrote. you open a commentary, and the commentary is going to say, well, he wrote this. He listed the sins of the accusers, and that may be exactly what he wrote. I don't know. They don't know either. But I've often found it very interesting in this scene that Jesus stooped down on the ground and wrote twice, 2 times, separate times. And I've often wondered if maybe one of those times, it's just pure conjecture, but I just wonder maybe if one of those times Jesus wrote for the benefit of the accused. Whatever Jesus wrote was true, but I've often wondered if Jesus didn't write for the benefit of the accused, at least one of those times. What if Jesus had written, you are forgiven. You are loved. You are a daughter of the King. Because we know after everybody finally had left, and Jesus said in verse 10, where are your accusers? And she said, they've gone away. And Jesus said, I do not condemn you either. From now on, sin no more. Don't you know that changed her life? It was shocking the way Jesus handled that whole situation, but not shocking to him. I'm amazed as I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm amazed, above all, at how Jesus handled the women who came to him. Because you have to understand the culture of the first century, the culture that Jesus was in. It was misogynistic to the core. And when Jesus came as this young rabbi, he turned misogyny on its head. No self-respecting rabbi would ever dare to speak to a woman publicly. Jesus not only spoke to women, he listened to them. And he heard them. And he healed them. And he helped them. In Luke 13, he made people mad. In Luke the 13th chapter, beginning in verse 10. Luke chapter 13 and beginning in verse 10. He heals this woman on the Sabbath day. And they started snipping at him and they started griping and complaining. Verse 14, the synagogue official became indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he began saying to the crowd, there are 6 days in which work should be done. So come during them and get healed, not on the Sabbath. But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or donkey from the stall and lead him to water?" Why, sure they did that. They did that every Sabbath. "And this woman, a daughter of Abraham, as she is, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, should she not have been released from this bond on the Sabbath day?" And notice verse 17. And he said, as he said this, all of his opponents were being humiliated. And the entire crowd was rejoicing over the glorious things that was done by him. But I want you to notice something Jesus says in verse 16. This woman, he says, is a daughter of Abraham. That sent shockwaves through the crowd. That's the only time that phrase is used in the New Testament. How many times did Jesus have interaction with the Pharisees and they kind of, got really offended? And they, "Oh, we're sons of Abraham." And Jesus here says, well, let me remind you of something. This is a daughter of Abraham. She is a daughter of Abraham. And the daughters of Abraham are just as important in the eyes of God as the sons of Abraham. You see that over and over and over again. To the chagrin of the Pharisees, Jesus allowed these women to minister to him. They washed his feet with their tears. They went out and told others about Jesus and brought them to Jesus. They traveled with Jesus. They even supported his ministry financially, which was taboo in that day. I find it really interesting. The first person to whom Jesus ever announced he was Messiah, the first person, was a woman in the middle of nowhere at a well. The first person to discover the empty tomb was a woman. The first person to whom he appeared after the resurrection was a woman. And as I read Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, every attitude of Jesus that he manifested toward women, I'm going to tell you, culture went this way and Jesus went that way. It was countercultural. Because in first century Israel, women were second class in every way. Education was not available. Do you know the testimony of a woman in a court of law in the first century was inadmissible? They couldn't own land. These are the times in which Jesus walked. And then the Pharisees just elevated that to a whole different level. And they had all these strict rules and regulations for their rabbis about how you interact with women. And Jesus, they put up all the stop signs and Jesus ran right through every one of them. He ignored them all. And it was shocking. But not to Jesus. Now, we said last night, I'll say it again, do men and women have different roles when it comes to different things? Or yes. We have different roles in the church. We have different roles and responsibilities in the home. All of that is absolutely true. But what we said was that has nothing to do with equality. Galatians 3 and verse 28. There's neither Jew nor Greek, bond or free, male or female. We are one in Christ. And even in the home setting, in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7, Peter reminds us we are fellow heirs of the grace of God. But when you get and understand the culture of the first century, the way Jesus treated women was shocking. And my point tonight is pretty simple, and this is it. We need more Jesus men in the 21st century who would treat women like Jesus treated them in the first century. We need more Jesus-type husbands who respond with the kind of kindness and care and respect like Jesus. We sing songs all of the time. Oh, to be like thee. And we need to be like him when we go home. And in the way we treat one another. But I want to go back to the scene in Luke 7 where we started. This woman that crashed this party, We talk sometimes about wedding crashers. We know what that is. Well, this was a party crasher, a dinner crasher. She certainly wasn't invited. Her showing up was scandalous. The notation is given in the text that she was an immoral woman, and everybody in town would have known that. And she heard the whispers, probably everywhere she went, how this woman had the courage to walk into this Pharisee's house. Undoubtedly, many other Pharisees were there. How she had the courage to go into that house and face all of those stairs and hear all of these whispers, I don't know. I think it's a testimony to hope. I think it's a testimony to Jesus. And she knelt down and her tears splashed all over his feet. Have you ever been in a room where there's tension? Where there's tension? Somebody does something or say something, and suddenly the room is filled with tension. And that's what this is. She falls at his feet. She wipes her tears with her hair. She takes out a little vial of perfume and she anoints the feet of Jesus. And as bizarre as that was, and everybody's watching this, and they're all wondering, how's this young rabbi going to respond to this? And amazingly, Jesus just sat there. Jesus never flinched. He never flinched. The Pharisees were flinching all over the room, you know. Look at verse 39. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what sort of person this woman is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. Well, I got news for this Pharisee. Jesus did know. He knew all about that woman. And he also knew all about that Pharisee. He knew all about him too. Jesus could see what the Pharisees couldn't see. Jesus could see her heart. But he could also see their heart. So pick up the reading beginning in verse 40. After this scene happens, Jesus answered him, Simon, that was the name of the man who was hosting this dinner, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he replied, say it, teacher. And Jesus launches into one of his stories, one of his parables. A moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. So which of them will love him more? Simon answered and said, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And Jesus said to him, you have judged correctly. Turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and has wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she, since the time I came in, has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with perfume. For this reason I say to her, her sins, which are many. Jesus doesn't bypass that. Her sins, which are many, have been forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. Then he said to her, Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. Those who were reclining at table with him began to say to themselves, mumble, mumble, who is this man who forgives sins? And he said to the woman, he ignores them. Instead, he focuses on the woman and he said, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Now, don't misunderstand. God doesn't wink at sin. God doesn't overlook sin. God doesn't ignore it. Jesus doesn't do that here. What God does over and over and over again is remind us of the cost of sin. And to remind us of the cost to forgive messed up people like us, like her, like you and me. We sing the song, he paid a debt he did not owe. I owed a debt I could not pay, and so he paid it all. This woman couldn't pay the debt. The Pharisees couldn't pay the debt. You can't pay the debt. I can't pay the debt. So he paid it all. And the most amazing thing for me as I read this section, this scene, the most amazing thing to me about the whole thing is that he would do that for her. But more amazing than that is that he would do that for me. He would do that for all of us. I want you to look at how Jesus treated people. In John chapter 4, you talk about a mess. Look at the messy woman at the well in John chapter 4. We don't know much about this woman. We know a little bit, but we don't know much. But Jesus knew everything. And we know that she comes in the heat of the day to draw water. Verse 5, they came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, being weary from the journey, was sitting thus by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. He sent the 12 on into the village to get food. And so Jesus, it's noontime, and Jesus is sitting in the shade of this well, resting. And here comes this one woman to draw water. Now, the fact that she comes at the 6th hour is odd. Because that's not how it usually went. The women of the village would always come for the water early in the mornings. They would come early in the day. For one thing, it's cooler then. This is a hot region of the world. And they would come first thing in the morning at first light. And so it was cooler then. But more than that, that was their social media. That's where they would get together and talk. That's when they get together and share. That's when they would get together and tell about how everybody's doing and who's sick and who's doing better. And they would just get all of the village information about each other. And so they would just enjoy. That was just a time of great conversation and camaraderie. This woman didn't come with the rest of them. Why not? Well, it was easier that way. If she waited and came when nobody was there, there'd be less stares. There'd be less chance of any kind of confrontation. There'd be less talk. So that's when she came. So verse 7, there came a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Jesus said, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said unto him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? And then there's the parenthetical, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? Well, the answer to the question is, Jesus knew she was broken. Jesus knew she was broken. And is that not the message of the gospel, that he loves the broken? That he loves the broken people? That he loves us in spite of our brokenness, in spite of our mess? That he loves us in spite of our past, in spite of our addictions, in spite of our troubles? The message of the gospel is Jesus takes us just where we are. But he doesn't leave us there. He doesn't leave us there. He's going to change us. And he's going to change this woman. Jesus answered and said to her, verse 10, if you knew the gift of God. Now we would say that differently. We would say, Jesus, if you only knew who I am. And who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. She says, sir, you have nothing to draw water with. And the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water? You just see her carrying on this. She's going about her business, and she's just kind of under the breath carrying on this conversation with Jesus. You're not greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle. Jesus answered and said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. Well, she knew that. She's having to come out every day. But whoever drinks of the water I give shall never thirst. But the water that I give will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. And the woman says to him, sir, give me this water. I want this kind of water, so I don't have to keep coming back out here every day. Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty, or come all of the way here to draw. And that's when Jesus changes the subject in verse 16 and says, go call your husband and come here. Did he not know? Yeah, he knew. He waded right into the middle of her messy life. And he says, go call your husband. And that's when she told a half-truth. And that's when Jesus told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the God truth. You know? The truth about her and the truth about him. And you read on, and he talks with her more and more and more. And the curiosity just goes deeper and deeper and deeper with her. Until the woman said in verse 25, I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And Jesus said unto her, I who speak to you am. The he is in our italics. It's not there. I who speak to you am. You go back to Exodus. Who shall I say sent me? I am that I am. Jesus is telling this woman who says, you know, when the Messiah comes, Jesus said, I am Messiah. I'd like to see, I wish the Lord would give us more information on this scene. I would love to see the expression on her face when she just finally got it. I can't imagine as she's processing all of this. How does he know me? How does he know all about my life? How does he know? And he's talking to me this way. And she's trying to put all the pieces together. Here's what's interesting about this scene in John chapter 4. Do you know this is the longest one-on-one conversation that is given to us in Scripture of Jesus and another person? Take out the 12. He had lots of conversations with them. I'm talking about Jesus and his one-on-one conversations with people. This is the longest one. Jesus and this unnamed woman at the well. And suddenly, her thirst was quenched. She just can't believe. She's beside herself. And at this point, verse 27, the disciples came. And I want you to see this. They were amazed he had been speaking with a woman. Because you didn't do this. They were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman, yet no one said, what do you seek? In other words, nobody said to the woman, what do you want? Or, why do you speak with her? Nobody said to Jesus, why are you talking with her? So the woman left the water pot. That's why she came. She came to draw water. She drops it. And she goes back into the city. I'm guessing she runs. And she gathers the men. She gets with the very people in the village she tries to avoid. And she says, come and see a man who has told me all the things I have done. This is not Messiah, is it? And she was so convincing. They went out of the city and they were coming to Jesus. I think of all of the scenes in the New Testament, this is one of the ones that impacts me the most. Because I don't know that we would have handled the woman at the well nearly as like Jesus did. What do you do with the woman at the well? I mean, by her own admission, by her own confession, when she goes back into town, it is indicative that there's a less than a moral to her story. She knows that. The townspeople all know that. And apparently Jesus knows that, whom she'd never met before. She's aware of her past. She's aware of the judgment. She's aware of the hiss of shame that's upon her. But so is Jesus. But Jesus was also aware of something else. He could read her heart. And he could see beyond her past. He could see the present and the future. What does he do with her? Well, we see that the 12, verse 27, the 12 were not comfortable with this. They were not comfortable that Jesus has been talking to her. First of all, she's a Samaritan, strike one. Second of all, she's a woman, strike two. And third, can you imagine their response if they knew the rest of the story? If they knew what Jesus knew? Strike three. And what if a person like this walked into a 21st century assembly? Would we shun her? Would we look down our nose at her? Would we ignore her? And what if she found the cross? What if she found the one who was Messiah, who could forgive her of all of her sins? And here's the most amazing thing of all. It was right here that Jesus speaks truth that he had not shared with Herod. He had not made this grand announcement in front of the Jewish Sanhedrin. He didn't stand up in front of some Roman building with those fancy colonnades. He didn't stand there and make the great confession to everyone that he was Messiah. He never did that. Instead, he made the grand announcement in the shade of a well, in a rejected place, to a rejected woman, and he said unto her in verse 26, I am Messiah. And she was beside herself. And her life was forever changed because of the way he treated her. That even in her mess, she mattered. But then again, so do all of us. As I read all of these accounts of Jesus in these one-on-one conversations, he brought hope to the hopeless. He brought worth to the worthless. And he offered a relationship to people who thought their lives were ruined to the point that they would never be able to find it. And in none of these cases does he wink at sin. None of them. Instead, by the blood of the cross, he washes it. He cleanses it. And I'm here to tell you, we preachers talk a lot about restoring the New Testament church, but I'm going to tell you something. If you want to restore the New Testament church, it starts with restoring the New Testament Jesus. And it starts with how you treat people. And it starts with how you see people. And it starts with how you respond to people. How you and I choose to treat people matters more than anything we say. Because if we don't treat them like Jesus, we will never have the opportunity to say anything. I told you last night about our Thrive events that Julie and I do for women twice a year. And for women who have been abused. And how we usually advertise it once and it's pretty well full. And when we go home next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is our next one. And over 120 women have come through this program. One of the things we do is on Saturday afternoon, the Japanese have this really cool thing called kintsugi, where a potter will take broken pieces of pottery. And rather than just throwing them away, the potter will take these broken pieces of pottery and will put them back together with liquid gold. And the gold cements the pieces. And what you end up with is a beautiful piece of pottery. The cracks don't disappear. The gold makes the cracks stand out. Now, what we do with these women, we don't give them liquid gold. It's a little expensive. We give them gold glue, okay? They get gold glue. And so we give them this really pretty beautiful bowl. And they get a hammer. And each one of them, one at a time, takes the hammer and they break that bowl. And suddenly this beautiful bowl is in 5 or 6 pieces. And we tell them, this represents your life. This is your brokenness. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the pieces back together with this gold glue. And when the pieces come back together and the glue cements, the cracks don't disappear, but the gold is filling in all of the cracks and stands out. And we tell them that represents God's amazing grace. The gold represents His grace to put the pieces back together. And then they take the bowls home with them. And I'll tell you why that's important. Because we deal with a lot of women who are exactly like this woman in John chapter 4. She felt hopeless. She felt worthless. If anybody had ever messed up her life to the point of no return, it was this woman right here. And Jesus said, no, no, no. And he reached out to her. And if he can reach out to her, he can reach out to you, and he can reach out to me. We had one of the ladies that came through our program was 80 years old. When she was 16, she was raped by her father and impregnated. And she ended up giving birth. The child didn't live long. And the family shunned her because they blamed her. It's all your fault. It's all your fault. And she said, I've lived all of my life to the point I'm 80 years old. She said, my life is worthless. Because I've been told I'm worthless. I've been called every name in the book. I've been told I'm worthless. And I've lived all my life believing I'm worthless. By the time we left on Sunday afternoon, she said, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have worth. I feel like I have value. I've come to realize I'm a daughter of the King. Yes, I'm broken, but so is everybody else. And God has helped me put the pieces back together. Say, what does this have to do with marriage? Everything. Because how we treat each other begins with how we treat each other at home as husbands and wives. And the value we place upon the one who is our spouse. To make sure he knows and she knows that he is a son of the King and that she is a daughter of the King. We sing the song of invitation, number 322. What is that? What is the song?
Bring Christ your broken life.
Oh, okay. We didn't even coordinate that, did we? Bring Christ your broken life. That's it. And that's what it's all about. We can help you in some way tonight. We're in obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let us know if we can pray with you or whatever the case may be. Please let us know. Let's stand and sing this song.